we document human pain. I would like to focus on the human rights violation under Russian occupation. But first, let me assure you that people in Ukraine want peace much more than anyone else. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop fighting. That's not peace, that's occupation. And occupation is just another form of the war. People in occupation have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their lives, their property, and their beloved ones. They live in gray zone. Russian occupation, it doesn't just change one state flag to another. Russian occupation means torture, enforced disappearances, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. The story of 59-year-old father Stepan Podolchak illustrated brightly. 2 months ago, Russians came to his house. They took the priest away, making everything in his house upside down. He was taken with a bag on his head and barefooted. After 2 days, Russians told his wife that the father, Stepan Podolchak, was dead. Russians tortured him to death only because he refused to transfer his church to Moscow Patriarchate. As a lawyer, I'm in a very difficult situation. We have no legal tools how to stop these Russian atrocities and how to save Ukrainian civilians. The war turns people into the numbers, and I start to witness by myself because the scale of war crimes grows so large that it becomes impossible to recognize all the stories. But I would like to tell you one. This is a story of 62-year-old civilian Alexander Shalipov, who was killed by Russian military near his house. This tragedy received a huge media coverage only because it was the first court trial after large-scale war started. In the court, his wife Katerina shared that her husband was an ordinary farmer, but he was her whole universe, and now she lost everything. So what we are doing in reality as a human rights lawyer, we try to return people their name, because only justice can do it. And we want to ensure justice for all victims of this war, regardless who they are, their social positions, the types of crime they endure, and whether or not media or international organizations are interested in their case. Because the life of each person matters. And I'm here to ask you for support of our fight for justice. We must establish a special tribunal on aggression and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and top political leadership and high military command of Russian state accountable. Because all atrocities which we now are documenting, it's results of their leadership decision to start such war. And this is a common logic. If we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to punish the states and their leaders who start such wars in present. Thank you.
And now we open the floor for questions and answers. We start with Mr. Majumdar. Mr. Majumdar, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you for your testimony, for your presence, for your continued fight for the people of Ukraine. Let me start by asking this question about what you just raised and presented now. Present international institutions do not provide the tools that the Nuremberg trials had provided to go after the people who ordered atrocities, as opposed to individuals that had committed atrocities. In your view, as a lawyer, how can a special tribunal be constituted, and what are the political and legal obstacles toward making that actually happen? You have, in my total time with you, we'll share that time.
I totally believe that we have to establish a special tribunal on aggression in a form of international court, because only international court can overcome immunity, which Putin has according to international law. And this is very essential, because if we will create such tribunal as a hybrid court without this possibility, We will never explain people in Ukraine and people in Canada why international community create a special tribunal to prosecute responsible person for the crime of aggression, which have no possibility to prosecute the most responsible one.
That's an excellent response. Thank you for that. As you look at Ukraine and the humanitarian issues that Ukrainians are facing today, from your perspective, what is the best way that Canada can provide humanitarian assistance to Ukrainians?
Probably from the human rights lawyers it will be very weird, but I will be very honest. We need weapons. We need weapons. You can send dozens of generators, but one F-16 can secure Ukrainian sky from rockets which destroy energy system in Ukraine. So I think that it's much more essential not just to work with fires, but starting to repair the roots of the problem.
I appreciate that. And, you know, it's frustrating sometimes to watch it from here in Ottawa where promises are made and not delivered upon, including defense production, weapon supplies, things that have been procured but not actually distributed to the Ukrainian people. I think it's a malpractice of government here that we need to focus on. Let me ask about persecution of Ukrainian cultural heritage. You described a horrific situation in which religious freedom was undermined instead of bowing before the Moscow Patriarchate. To what extent are Protestant and Catholic persecutions occurring in Ukraine today?
Several years ago, we established a religious roundtable, and we invited different churches, confessions, and religious organizations to work together with human rights organizations to secure situation with religious freedom in occupied territories. Because Russia pretend that they are a religious country, but they see religion like a collective category. If you are not a part of Russian military machine, your religion will be persecuted. And that is why Russia deliberately organized the system of religious persecution in occupied territories. And this is a real problem.
Thank you very much for that. We have about a minute left, I understand. So when you are engaging capitals like Ottawa, but other countries around the world, what is the number one message that you wish for the world to understand, noting that the fight in Ukraine is linked to authoritarians whose encroachments are hitting the Middle East, the Indo-Pacific region? When you look at that bigger picture, what's the best advice you would offer legislators in the democratic world?
I want everyone to know this is not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And with this war, Putin attempts to convince the entire world that democracy, rule of law, and human rights are fake values because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. With this war, Putin wants to convince that country with a strong military potential and nuclear weapons can break international order, can dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly change internationally recognized borders. And if Russia succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same.
Alexandra, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Majumdar. Madame Vandenberg, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for your very powerful testimony. And please be assured that we all stand with you, with the people of Ukraine, and with all of those victims of war crimes for whom you are seeking justice. And I know that many of those war crimes victims and survivors are women, particularly when it comes to sexual violence. But I also know that women in Ukraine are agents of change. And I would just wonder if you could talk a little bit about to what extent Ukrainian women are participating in the documentation, but also participating in other ways in order to win the fight against Putin's Russia.
Thank you for this question. I know enormous amount of fantastic women in different fields of Ukrainian society. 60,000 of Ukrainian women joined Ukraine armed forces. Ukrainian women take important political decisions. Ukrainian women coordinate civil initiatives. Ukrainian women document war crimes. Women are in the far front of this battle for freedom and for democracy, because bravery has no gender. And from this gender perspective, it's very visible the value dimension of this war, because in democratic countries, women can play any role they want in family and society. But in Russia and in autocracies, women play only a assigned role for them in families and societies. And this is a basis for the authoritarian regime, because established relationship between people and society always reflect how government behaves towards its own people. So to be clear, in this fight with Russia, we are Ukrainian women are fighting for our daughters. We want that our daughters will never face the situations that they have to prove someone that they are also human beings.
Thank you so much. I think that is extremely, extremely powerful. And I just want to comment on something that you said, because we know that your organization that you lead, and therefore you, are a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And at the same time, you're here before our committee asking for weapons. And that can sometimes seem discordant. But I wonder if you could explain what peace means to you and to the people of Ukraine, and why it is that you're here today, rightly, I think, asking for the weapons that you need in this fight in order to restore the peace.
I think that the problem is that sometimes international community don't define the words peace properly, because peace means freedom to live without fear of violence and have a long-term perspective of future. And this is something which we now haven't in Ukraine, being under Russian attack. And I, as a human rights lawyer, have no legal instruments which I can use to stop Russian atrocities. Russian troops are deliberately shelling residential buildings, schools, churches, museums, and hospitals. They attack evacuation corridors. They torturing people in filtration camps. They forcibly taking Ukrainian children to Russia. They are abducting, robbing, raping, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. And the entire international system of peace and security can't stop this. So that's why I'm in this position. When someone asks me how to protect people in Ukraine, I have to answer, give Ukraine weapons. But as a human rights lawyer, I do believe that it's temporary, that we will be able to restore international order with legitimate force. We will be able to demonstrate justice and break the circle of impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria. We will be able to provide peace in our part of the world.
You are indeed fighting for peace for all of us, for all of the democratic world, and we are very, very thankful to you, and we support you in that. Just a very quick question about what it is that you need most. I can only imagine that the task of documenting is enormous. What is it specifically that you would need most from us in terms of direct support to be able to do that?
Ukrainian officers.
Within 25 seconds, please.
Okay. We need professional on the ground, not just trainings and consultants, because we have to investigate 130,000 criminal proceedings for current moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Van den Bellen. Mr. Brunel Duceppe, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I will allow Ms. Matvarychuk to put on her earpiece. Is it working for you? Can you hear the interpreter, madam? Very well. Good. To begin with, thank you so much for joining us. It's truly an honor to have you as a guest of our committee. You represent courage, strength, and the love of Ukrainians. I knew personally Victoria Melina, whom I spent a few days with, and all the conversations I had with her really taught me so much. She lifted the blinders from my eyes. She, too, represents the courage and the strength and the love of Ukrainians, and we think of her regularly. You have mentioned a court. I think this is a very interesting proposal. This would be a court operating in parallel to the International Criminal Court, which would bring to justice war criminals. Could you get into more details? What would be the aims of this court and how would it be set up?
Thank you very much for this question and for mentioning my dearest friend, Victoria Melina. She was killed by Russian rocket last year, being in Kramatorsk. And she is a great example of Ukrainian writer who started to document Russian war crimes. She knows that with her efforts, being a human, she can't stop this war, but without her efforts, nothing will be stopped. When we speak about special tribunal, we have to describe the problem. The problem is that there is no international court which can prosecute Putin and his surrounding for the crime of aggression. And that is why we have to establish a special tribunal with the aim to prevent wars in the future. Because it's a signal to future that if you start the war, regardless, will you win this war, will you lose this war, you will be punished. And it provides wars under not just legal measures. It makes war without sense. So it's important to create this special tribunal in the premises of international organizations, because we can imagine that Putin can create its own tribunal, invite Venezuela, Iran, Nicaragua, Syria, Eritrea. That's why we're working on two tracks to create such special tribunal in the premises of UN, which means that we need two-thirds majority of votes, which is difficult, or to create this special tribunal in the premises of regional international organizations like Council of Europe.
Et donc ce tribunal-là,
So this tribunal or court, logically speaking, if I understand your undertaking, we should start putting it together now, instituting it now, establishing it now. We shouldn't wait till the end of the war.
Because the problem is that we still look to the world through the lens of the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi war criminals were tried only after Nazi regime had collapsed. But we live in a new century. Justice shouldn't be dependent on the magnitude of Putin's regime's power. This means that we cannot wait. We must establish a special tribunal now and hold Putin and other criminals accountable.
puis il me reste du temps, hein, Monsieur le Président?
I still have a little time left, Chair. A minute and a half. Very good. So how can we, as parliamentarians here in Quebec and of Canada, how can we help you in setting up such a court? I understand that the international community has a role to play in this, but could Canada play an important role? Could Canada, contribute as much as any other country, and what should we do?
Canada can play a leading role. And we live in a new world. We still look through the world through the lens of the states and interstate organizations, but I think that people have a much more power than they can even imagine. And that's why people in Canada and you as a parliament can create demand for justice. Because what I see for current moment, that politicians from different countries, they think that justice is secondary. They don't understand that justice is precondition to peace in our part of the world, where Russia for decades uses the war as a tool how to achieve their geopolitical interests, and for decades uses war crimes as the methods how to win these wars.
Vous avez
Thank you, Mr.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much.
Mr. John, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Matviachuk, for being here, for your courage and strength and leadership through this terrible tragedy. And we had Darka Harnik, a young, strong woman, Ukrainian intern in my office, and really helped provide us some insight about the courage of Ukrainian women through this crisis. I guess I want to start with, children. We've seen and heard about 19,500 Ukrainian children that have been abducted and taken to Russia. What can Canada do to help return the abducted Ukrainian children of this war against Ukraine?
Canada is leader of international coalition of returning of Ukrainian children back. That means that Canada can initiate a lot of actions which can be taken simultaneously by states which are members of this international coalition. For example, we can speak about sanctions. We have to demonstrate that people who are involved in this genocidal policy to take Ukrainian children to Russia to bring them up as Russians will be punished. Also, Canada can address to Deputy of General Secretary of United Nations, who is responsible for children in the war, with a request to provide a status of abducted child for Ukrainian children in Russia before till the moment when their whereabouts and their destiny will be identified and solved. So Canada can do a lot, and also I will focus on something which Canada can provide for children in Ukraine, because children are going through the experience of the war, and this is a very horrible experience. And they need a lot of psychological help. And now we have a lack of mental specialists in Ukraine for providing this help. And just to understand the circumstances, I will tell you a story of one Ukrainian children. It's a story of 10-year-old boy Ilya from Mariupol. When Russians tried to siege the city, they didn't allow Ukrainian International Committee of Red Cross to evacuate civilians. Hence, Ilya and his mother hid in the basement of their building from Russian shellings. They melted snow to have water. They made fires to cook at least some food. But when supplies ran out, they were forced to go out, and suddenly they appeared under Russian shelling. Ilya's mother was injured in her head, and the boy's leg was torn. With the last strength, his mother took her son to the friend apartment. It was no medical assistance, because prior to this, Russia destroyed hospitals and the entire medical infrastructure in Mariupol. So in this friend apartment, Ilya and his mother, they were laying on a couch and hugging each other. And they were laying like this for several hours. And Ilya told to my colleague that his mother died and got frozen right in his arms.
I'm very sorry to hear that story. I know you met with the Prime Minister yesterday, and Canada is part of the international coalition, and our understanding is the Prime Minister intends to raise this at the upcoming G7 meetings. More than ask, what would you like to see that ask look like, especially mental health supports? Are you looking for mental health teams coming from the G7 and the international community to support children in Ukraine?
I think we have to find sustainable solution, which means that probably it's a time to help Ukraine to open a new program in universities to educate new mental health specialists in Ukraine, because we don't know for much time we need such specialists. It can't be just temporary assistance.
Is it something that, also we have a lot of Ukrainians that are abroad in Canada, for example, with the expectation to return and help rebuild Ukraine at the hopeful end of this war. Would it be something that Canada and Canadians and other countries could be helped with training Ukrainians so that they're equipped to return home to this to the end of this conflict, hopefully, that happens?
We don't know. Either we're in the end of the war, in the middle of the war, or just in the beginning of the war. This means that we have no luxury to postpone a lot of things after the war period. We have to start recovery now and to return breath to the local community and provide people opportunity to return home.
Thank you.
Thanks.
On behalf of the committee, Madam, I would like to thank you. Thank you for your presence, for your great job you're doing as a human rights lawyer, and I repeat again, well deserve your Nobel Prize. It's a great pleasure to the committee to welcome you and to thank you. Many thanks. Meeting is suspended. J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I will now call to order our meeting. We'll resume our meeting.
Bon retour.
Welcome back. And indeed, we do resume our meeting. The subcommittee begins its study of the current situation in Sudan. In accordance with our housekeeping motion concerning the audio tests, I would like to inform the subcommittee that all witnesses have completed the required tests prior to the meeting. I'd like to welcome our witnesses. For Doctors Without Borders, we have Ms. Beatrice Lau, legal counsel, and she joins us by video conference. Representing the International Republican Institute, we have Mr. Santiago Stalker, Program Manager for Sudan, also joining us by video conference. Welcome to both witnesses. You will each have a maximum of 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor to members as questions. Welcome, Ms. Beatrice Lau. I invite you to make your opening statement. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, madam.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. This year, between January to April, I was in Sudan with Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, and we currently provide medical assistance in 9 states across Sudan. Speaking from my experience on the ground, it is not an exaggeration to describe Sudan as being ensnared in a perfect storm of conflict, displacement, malnutrition, and ethnic and gender-based violence. The country's health system is on the brink of a total collapse, with 70 to 80% of health facilities no longer operational. A real threat of disease outbreaks looms as the national immunization program has been disrupted since the conflict began. Our teams have administered the last vials of vaccines weeks ago, and no new supplies have reached the areas where they are critically needed. Despite this magnitude of the humanitarian crisis, we witness, however, an alarming absence of other humanitarian actors in the areas where we work. This may be partly due to security concerns amid ongoing violent fightings in certain parts of the country, with aid workers being killed, injured and harassed, and humanitarian supplies being looted. The lack of humanitarian response is also driven by gross underfunding. Over a month ago, at the International Humanitarian Conference for Sudan in Paris, numerous countries pledged support, including Canada, which committed $132 million. Notwithstanding these pledges, the Sudan Humanitarian Response Plan for this year remains only 16% funded. In my intervention today, however, I'd like to focus on one specific issue: the lack of humanitarian access. As we speak, it is estimated that 11 million people, that is nearly half of those in need of aid, are effectively denied of assistance as a result of the systematic obstruction of cross-line movements by both parties to the conflict and the restrictions of cross-border operations imposed by the government of Sudan. Since the country succumbed to war, cross-border operations from Chad have been the only means of accessing the Darfur region. Being present in Darfur, MSF confirms that there are no other viable options to reach that part of the country. In that regard, the closure of the Adre border crossing by the government of Sudan in February has drastically limited the assistance that can now reach Darfur. This is particularly concerning when the majority of the 4.9 million people whom the UN has assessed to be just one step away from famine is found in the Darfur region, and the window to scale up response to avert the onset of famine is quickly shrinking. The recent military escalation in and around El Fasher in North Darfur has rendered cross-border operations via the Tine crossing, which is the only crossing from Chad the government of Sudan has consented to after February, impossible. Additionally, MSF and other aid actors continue to face systematic obstructions and deliberate denials of safe humanitarian passage by both parties to the conflict. Since the end of September, Our requests to send personnel or medical supplies across conflict lines have been repeatedly denied. The persistent lack of authorizations has recently forced MSF to suspend work and withdraw staff from Madani Teaching Hospital, which is the only functional hospital in the capital of Al Jazeera state. Before our suspension, MSF had been the only international NGO providing medical humanitarian assistance in Madani. To prevent the crisis from further spiraling to a catastrophe, intervention at all levels is needed, and they are needed now. There is really no time to lose. We therefore respectfully urge the Canadian government to do two things. First, we ask that you reinforce your diplomatic efforts to demand the parties to the conflict to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and their commitment to the Jeddah Declaration. Specifically, they should immediately cease all acts denying, obstructing, and interfering with or politicizing humanitarian action, and to facilitate unimpeded humanitarian access, including through all possible cross-lines and cross-border routes to expedite aid. They must also protect civilians from violence and protect medical and humanitarian missions from attacks. Second, consider increasing your funding commitment or to make the funding available in flexible and innovative way. We should not forget that there is a very vibrant civil society in Sudan, and some Sudanese organizations or volunteer networks are responding to needs where international actors cannot reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Exactly 5 minutes. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Mr. Santiago Stocker, Directeur du Programme pour le Soudan.
Director of the Program for Sudan. Program Director for Sudan, you have 5 minutes, sir, and welcome.
Thank you, honorable members of Parliament. I appreciate the opportunity to share perspectives on the issue of Sudan and to elevate the voices of our Sudanese partners who have suffered greatly and are desperate to be heard. There is no greater expression of democratic self-determination than the popular overthrow of a dictator. That is what happened in Sudan in 2019, creating hope that Sudan would enter the democratic age. Yet a tortured transition ensued, which ultimately resulted in a military coup in 2021, orchestrated by the same parties that have plunged Sudan into civil war. The devastation caused by this war is further compounded by the lost opportunity for democratic transition which preceded it. The speed and scale of Sudan's collapse have been breathtaking. Sudan now has roughly 8.8 million people displaced and some 25 million requiring humanitarian assistance. Sudan is now the largest conflict displacement crisis in the world and one of the largest in recent history. As of May 24th, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project documents more than 17,000 direct conflict fatalities, with more than 30,000 injured, according to the IRC. These numbers are conservative and do not include deaths from starvation, injuries, or disease, and likely undercount deaths from multiple large-scale massacres of civilians by RSF forces and allied militias in Darfur. Even by these conservative numbers, the war in Sudan is the deadliest war on the African continent. The war combines the worst elements of both conventional and unconventional warfare. The widespread use of heavy weapons, including artillery, mortars, drones, and airstrikes, has caused major damage to populated areas and civilian infrastructure. At the same time, the large-scale mobilization of ethnic and religious forces has unleashed sectarian violence and rampant criminality on the civilian population. A continued war poses significant risks to the region and, by extension, to U.S. and Canadian interests. Spillover of the conflict in neighboring states is a growing possibility. The stability of the Red Sea, already in jeopardy, will be further threatened. And the risk of violent extremism is growing. Islamist militias are already mobilized and fighting with the SAF. These militias, with their own agendas and extremist ideology, are dangerous veto players who could derail a future peace process. Sudan checks the box on many of the factors empirically shown to increase risks of violent extremism. With this backdrop, let me touch briefly on what IRI has been doing in Sudan. At IRI, we are trying to set the conditions for a Sudan where the aspirations of the people are addressed through legitimate mechanisms. Since 2019, we have been working to strengthen civilian elements to participate in the transition process. IRI supported the establishment of women and youth political party platforms, where members from different political parties and former armed movements came together to discuss avenues for improving the inclusion of women and youth within internal party processes, as well as part of the political transition process. With the Takadum Coalition, we have been supporting their members through trainings and advocacy and assistance on scenario planning and negotiations. We also work with the resistance committees, who played a key role in the overthrow of al-Bashir in 2019, to provide the tools and strategies needed to organize and meaningfully engage in political processes and advocacy. In partnership with Internews, we have been supporting journalists and media houses to report on the war and human rights violations. We are grateful to have funding from USAID and the State Department, the U.S. State Department, to carry out these activities. I want to note that these critically important civil society actors are facing significant threats both inside and outside of Sudan. Many civil society stakeholders were prevented from leaving Sudan to attend the recent Takadum founding conference in Addis Ababa. Members of Takadum, resistance committees, and other civil society organizations have been ruthlessly targeted by both SAF and RSF forces within Sudan. The international community must do more to protect these actors both inside and outside of Sudan. Let me turn next to the issue of ceasefire and negotiations. A ceasefire is urgently needed. While the RSF has repeatedly agreed to a ceasefire in principle, the SAF has rebuffed calls for a ceasefire and vows to fight until victory. Belligerents are unlikely to reach a ceasefire unless both sides view the cost of fighting to be higher than the cost of a ceasefire. The international community can increase punitive measures, including sanctions, against SAF and RSF leadership, international arms suppliers, and key members of its governing coalition, including businesses and hardline religious groups that are members of the SAF's coalition. Civilian forces are rarely included in direct negotiations, yet we know historically that ceasefires in Africa that include a timeline for negotiations—
If you could wrap it up, please, time is up.
Yes, absolutely. Or advance the peace process are twice as likely to be durable compared to ceasefires that are delinked from substantive negotiations. In closing, there will be no ceasefire unless the costs on belligerents and their sponsors are significantly raised by the international community. There will be no peace agreement unless the SAF, RSF, and civilian front are included in negotiations. Negotiations will not succeed unless the fundamental incompatibilities that led to the 2019 revolution, the 2021 coup, and the 2023 war are addressed, and that can only be credibly accomplished with the inclusion of all three parties. I welcome your questions.
And now we open for a question and answer. I would like to invite Mr. Majumdar. You have the floor for 7 minutes, please. Go ahead.
7 minutes. Thank you. Santiago, let me start with you. 14,700 killed and counting since 2023. You mentioned 8.6 million displaced, 25 million in urgent need of humanitarian assistance, the largest displacement challenge in the world today. I've read 3.5 million children under the age of 5 are now dealing with malnutrition. And just over a week ago, 30 civilians massacred over a week ago at El Fasher. You know, this has been going on for nearly a year of civil war. What is the current strategy missing in your view? What's the gap here?
Sure. So number one, the costs on the belligerents are not high enough to incentivize a ceasefire. The costs on the RSF and the SAF, as well as on their backers. So we know that UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Russia, Iran, and others are supporting the belligerents, not just through funding and politically, but also through arms and through exploitation of minerals, including gold. The backing by these international sponsors is critical to the continuation of the conflict. As I mentioned, this is in some regards a conventional conflict. Artillery, mortars, drones, munitions for airstrikes require a continuous supply. So this conflict is being fueled from the outside. So the costs both on the sponsors and on the belligerents themselves must be substantially increased. And there needs to be more support to the civilian coalition. What they tell us, the civil society actors who are pushing hard for peace, they tell us there needs to be a unified platform for negotiations, for unification of the peace processes, and they want the international community to pay attention, to elevate this issue, and to use all the levers at their disposal to get to a ceasefire and substantive negotiations to address the issues at the heart of this conflict.
Let me then ask a secondary question following on about how the nature of the conflict has become such a tragic human cost. What's the risk of the continued conflict to the wider region in the Horn of Africa?
Absolutely. So there are many risks. First is the spillover into neighboring countries, into South Sudan, Egypt, Chad, Libya, not just of refugees, but also of conflict potentially. And these are, in many cases, countries that already have grappling with issues of internal instability. And then the risks of violent extremism. All of the boxes are being checked in Sudan, the factors that contribute to the rise of major violent extremist organizations. Those factors are there. Those factors are present. That's very concerning. And that's a dynamic that could affect not just Sudan, but also the region and U.S. and Canadian interests. And then the population displacement. We've already had not only almost 9 million now displaced inside Sudan, but I think 2 million approximately pushed out of Sudan into the region, which already, as I said, has issues with stability, and that creates potentially immigration, refugee pressures beyond the region. So these are all foreseeable, plausible consequences that are unfolding before us, and this is why the international community needs to pay much more attention to what's happening in Sudan.
And so, with the rise of violent radical extremism as a consequence of an unmitigated civil war that is not being drawn to a close, how do you think this would impact migration into Europe and generally global migration beyond the region of what you just described?
Sure. So I think one of the things that's underappreciated here is how much worse the conflict actually could become. As I mentioned, it's already historic levels of internal displacement and really significant levels of external displacement. There are many foreseeable ways that this conflict becomes significantly worse. The rise of significant violent extremist organizations could play into that. The conflict is already becoming much more complex than it was before. We have many armed actors and interests at play. And whenever you have so many interests at play, there's the conflict and the way it unfolds becomes a lot harder to predict and a lot harder to resolve. So there could be significant escalation, and that will dramatically increase the pressures that are already there, not just on the countries in the region, but also on Europe and other regions as well.
Beatrice, in the last minute or two that I have here, can I ask you, in your perspective, specifically how have the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces obstructed the delivery of humanitarian aid into Sudan? What are some of the technical barriers you're encountering, particularly in the field?
Well, for us, first of all, in Sudan, wherever we go, we need to seek for travel permits, which is an authorization from the respective authorities to be able to move personnel or aid supplies to whichever location. And this is the case with SAF controlled areas as well as with RSF controlled areas as well. And we are seeing that it is getting more and more difficult. In fact, since September last year till now, we have not been able to get any travel permits for any movement that is crossing to the other side, that is crossing line, what we call the cross-line movement. And even in the past 2 or 3 months, increasingly, even within the areas which is controlled by, for example, RSF, getting supplies from let's say from Khartoum to Jazeera state, which is still within the RSF controlled area, it has already also become impossible. There is simply no authorization being given to us for moving these supplies and personnel around.
Thank you. Our third witness just arrived, so we have to suspend for a few seconds in order to do. Nazik Kabalo, Directrice from Sudanese Women Rights Action. Welcome, Madam, to our committee. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to testify in front of you today and provide information about the human rights situation in Sudan. After 13 months of war, Sudan became the land of horror and hunger. 49 million people, where over 20 million are children, are living in collapsed state. Half of the population are in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. 18 million people are acutely hungry, according to latest UN appeals, where 3.5 million children are acutely malnourished. According to recent report published by Human Rights Watch last month, RSF committed ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and used starvation and sexual violence as weapons of war in West Darfur. Our research in other areas of Sudan and documented reports by other local and international groups confirm the same patterns of grave human rights violations committed in other conflict areas in Sudan, including El Jazeera, Khartoum, and Kordofan. As I am addressing your committee at this moment, Al Fasher city, a home of more than 2 or 3 million people, is under siege by RSF. In the last 2 days, over 48 people were killed. The Sudanese armed forces use indiscriminate bombardment in conflict areas of Sudan, killing civilians and destroying hospitals, bridges, and other public and private properties. The warring parties in Sudan neglected the international humanitarian law and used heavy artillery and bombardments inside residential areas in the most populated cities in Sudan. These indiscriminate attacks against civilians areas resulted in destruction of public and private property and basic infrastructure, leaving millions of people without access to basic services such as water, electricity, healthcare, education, and communication. The war in Sudan is fueled by the continuous supply of weapons and financial resources from other countries. It's well documented that United Emirates has provided support to RSF, while other countries, including Iran and Russia, have supported SAF. The engagement of the Canadian government in Sudan have failed to respond at a high level and put the situation in Sudan on the top agenda of Canada Foreign Affairs. Canada has a remarkable record in supporting peace processes in Sudan since the 2005 peace agreement. This record and experience must be retained to push for peace and end suffering of Sudanese people. The strategic importance of the conflict in Sudan must be taken more seriously as part of Canada's top concerns for peace and security in Africa, Middle East, and globally. I call the committee members and Canadian government to take action to urge the warring party to uphold obligation under international humanitarian law, implement the Canadian government commitments to protect civilians and protect women and girls under the Canadian National Action Plan to implement 1325 resolution and the other commitments under the Canadian Feminist Foreign Policy, increase funding for humanitarian aid, and support local civil society to respond to the expanding crisis, especially women and youth-led initiatives, ensure more high-level engagement of the Canadian government on the situation in Sudan, and restore Canadian diplomatic presence in the country, and appoint a special envoy to contribute to the efforts of peacemaking. Review the announced immigration and relocation plans for Sudanese to accommodate the increasing needs and to match other plans implemented for other countries like Ukraine. Work with other members of the Security Council to extend the arms embargo on Darfur to all of Sudan. Support the calls for referral of the situation in Sudan to the International Criminal Court so that the ICC jurisdiction is extended to include all conflict areas in Sudan where war crimes and crimes against humanity were allegedly committed. Take effective measures to end the support provided to the warring parties in Sudan by countries like UAE, Russia, and Iran, including stopping selling arms to the UAE. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now to open the floor for a question and answer, reopen the floor. And now I would like to invite Mr. Ali Ahsasi. Take the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to our witnesses for appearing before us today. This has been very, very informative and very sobering, I might add. I'd first like to start off with Ms. Lau. We heard some statistics from Mr. Majumdar, truly, truly chilling. I also have heard, I remember in February that Médecins Sans Frontières was saying that every 2 hours a child was dying in the Zamzam area of Sudan. Have things improved since then, or have they only gotten worse?
Thank you for the question. No, unfortunately, no. The situation is actually, as we have more possibility to conduct, for example, for MSF, a nutritional assessment in other than Zamzam camp in North Darfur. In the past few months, we have also conducted nutritional assessment in, for example, in West Darfur, in South Darfur, and also in Gadara. So in other parts of Sudan, we actually, all these results seem to confirm that the situation of malnutrition, extreme malnutrition, securely acute malnutrition is actually happening not just only in North Darfur, not just only in Zamzam. Zamzam was perhaps the first one that we managed to alarm and made this news to the world that actually there is a catastrophic malnutrition crisis unfolding in Sudan. But unfortunately, it is really not just that part of the country that is
No, I'm fully aware, but I'm just saying that was the worst situation from what I could gather. But could you explain to us currently as things stand, because as I understand, atrocities are being committed on all sides of this dispute. What is, in your opinion, the most credible multilateral initiative that is taking place in an attempt to try to ensure that humanitarian assistance can make its way into the country?
In fact, that is precisely what we think is the most important, one of the most important initiatives that needs to take place in order to unblock the lack of humanitarian access.
Is anyone in the driver's seat? Is there any initiative currently underway which you think should be supported by countries around the world? Is there any initiative underway?
As far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, there is actually not one platform where both parties have agreed to be on. And without that, it is actually really difficult because from what we have seen, like, for example, for MSF or for even other like UN agencies, we have tried bilaterally in engaging with each of the parties. in terms of unblocking these humanitarian access problems. But the problem is that whatever one party has agreed to offer or to improve the situation, the other party would do something to sabotage and cancel it. So indeed, some kind of platform needs to bring the parties together in order to unblock the situation.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lau, and thank you for all your efforts. Now, if I could go to Mr. Stalker. You were suggesting that that assistance should be provided to civilian coalitions. But I was wondering, to the extent that that is possible, would there be distribution networks available that would ensure that that these supplies are making it to civilian coalitions around the country?
Yeah, so some of the most significant work being done on the ground in Sudan is being done by Sudanese organizations, emergency rooms, resistance committees, and there is a need for direct support. This is something that's been articulated by USAID Administrator Samantha Power and others. The acknowledgement that the international community needs to figure out creative ways to get direct funding and support to these organizations who are on the ground and who are providing medical and other services at the grassroots neighborhood community level. There are ways to do it, and that's going to take the resolve and creative thinking and coordination of the international community, but that is absolutely a need. And also support to the civilian coalition outside Sudan. There is a very credible coalition, Takadum, who just held their founding conference, and other civil society groups as well, who are at the forefront of pushing for negotiations, who are absolutely open to any platform, any forum, any pathway to begin talks. And they need support. And also, I would just add protection, both for members of these organizations within Sudan and outside, who are subject internally to persecution, targeting by both sides, and externally have faced a lot of challenges in terms of funding, travel, residency, and really need support to conduct their basic operations. I think the fact is that the democratic future of Sudan will ultimately be negotiated by these actors, and whatever support can be given to allow them to operate effectively and safely will be welcome and productive.
For that, I have very little time left, but I thought I would go to Ms. Caballo, who Ms. Vandenbelt knows well and always praises. Was wondering if there was any further advice you wanted to provide us. Thank you. Your testimony was very helpful, but just thought I would leave it to you as to whether there was any other issue you wanted to highlight and emphasize.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to emphasize the fact that for local organizations and women groups, youth groups working on the ground, we don't have the issue of access. We have the issue of funding. So without the funding, now many women and youth groups on the ground are actually have been holding the ground and feeding millions of people in Khartoum, an area that no INGO or international aid organization was able to set a foot in since the war started. All of the people in Khartoum are completely depending on humanitarian aid, on local initiatives. I could just say that MSF have some existence in Khartoum. I know that, but other organizations, especially providing food and other forms of livelihood assistance, are not existing. So I think what we need more is recognition of the efforts of the localized response that has been filling the gaps of the international absence from providing aid in Sudan. And we need you to work to fill the gaps in funding, to feed the people on the ground, because the main issue that right now is hunger, and we need to act now. And I think the international community need to understand that Sudan is a collapsed state, There is no state right now in Sudan. So all of these local groups working right now as a semi-government. Just before talking to you right now, I was discussing how we can provide a solar system to a hospital providing services for over 1 million residents in Khartoum. This is how we need the support to make sure that things are working.
Thank you, Madame Caballo. Maintenant, j'invite Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe à prendre la...
And now I yield the floor to Mr. Brunel-Duceppe. You have 7 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses participating in today's meeting. I hope that everyone is able to use the interpretation service and that it's working. Mr. Stalker. On the 14th of November 2023, the Assistant Secretary General of UN, the anti-genocide group, published a statement in which she stated that Darfur was a very worrisome situation and stating that the possibility of genocide was very high. Recently, a specialist from a human rights group expressed the same concerns. Do you have any points of view about this worry expressed that there's genocide underway in Darfur?
The legal determination is I will leave to others. What I will say is it is well documented that there has been ethnic cleansing on a significant level in Darfur of various ethnic groups. Some of the same groups that were targeted in prior genocides. So the killings are happening, and the risk of genocide is significant. And with El Fasher being under siege, I think 2 or 3 million people now, some 800,000 of them displaced, is a significant risk. We've seen communities, ethnic minorities in and around El Fasher, Zagawa communities and others recently targeted by RSF, and other groups like Masalit and Fur have been targeted because of their ethnic identity. So there's no doubt, both by RSF but also by their Arab militia allied forces. And so there's no doubt these killings are happening and that they are in many respects conducted on the basis of ethnicity. And the potential is there for these killings to happen on a much larger scale, and that's why it's critically important right now as we're looking at El Fasher, which is under siege with, as I said, almost 3 million people. There are some very catastrophic scenarios that could play out, and this is just another reason to really elevate this issue for the international community's attention.
Merci beaucoup. Madame.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lau, your organization has a considerable experience everywhere in the world. Really, that's why I'm putting this question to you. We have the impression that there is no international community interest in this conflict in Sudan. It seems that all this is kind of coming in under the radar and that the international community is not paying attention to what's going on in Sudan. Is this your opinion as well? And if so, how can that be explained?
Yeah, I think from our experience, indeed, it has been quite difficult to raise this situation in Sudan to get the attention from donor countries, from the international community, about all the problems like malnutrition, like the collapse of the health facilities, health system, and the threat of outbreak of diseases. It's very difficult to get this message out and get the attention that is needed in terms of funding, and also in terms of, for example, having the humanitarian actors on the ground to deliver the very much needed humanitarian response. And I've alluded to it in my opening remarks that partly it can be because of the security concern, but indeed we also see that in areas where actually there is far away from the front line, from the conflict line, and also with quite easily accessible, with logistically accessible areas like, for example, White Nile State, we're also not seeing any international actors on the ground. And also, for example, when the cross-border operations was actually possible before the government of Sudan decided to close down the border crossing in February, actually the UN agencies were also not like having very limited kind of cross-border operations as well. So indeed, we see that it may be because of what we saw on the ground is that because the UN has, for example, since last year in April, has put on Sudan as on a security level as evacuation status. So that actually implies that all